The Knicks are not going to be good this year, and that is because they do not have a star player. There was some talk about them getting a star this summer, and they bypassed the opportunity to potentially trade for Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, maybe others that we don't know about. And there was some thought. Can I say that? Yeah, sure. There was some thought that they were saving up their bullets for big free agent plans next summer. And some of those guys went off the market in the preceding weeks. And then this week, it was this week, right? Yeah, Giannis? What was it? It feels like forever. Was it Monday, Tuesday? I lose track.
It was Monday.
Days. It was Monday. Okay, so that's why it seems like a while ago. The big one went off the market, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Again, not that anyone inside the Knicks or out should have ever thought that he was going to come to the Knicks. And then earlier today, we're recording this on Sunday, Rudy Gobert signed this is insane to me, a 5-year, is it 204?
204, 205.
204, 205, whatever.
At that point, does it even really matter?
It's an average annual value of $40 million a year for, I mean, he's still the best defensive center in the NBA, so there's that. And that has real value, and it's Utah. And what else are they spending their money on? But I mean, hey, it's a lot of money. And again, you're probably sitting there and you're like, okay, who gives a shit? They weren't getting Giannis. They have Mitch. God knows at that price. And you could say the same thing about Paul George. Did the Knicks want to pay Paul George whatever the hell that contract was? No. The only one that happened this summer, much to your chagrin, which maybe we thought we had a chance at, was Anthony Davis because of the Kentucky thing, and then that went out the window. All this does is it basically sets in reality, which is that there was no panacea coming next summer via free agency. Like, yes, I know Kawhi Leonard is still out there and crazier shit has happened, but I hope the Knicks aren't banking on Kawhi Leonard coming here, right? And then after that, you get to who do you get to? You get to Victor Oladipo, and you get to Spencer Dinwiddie. You get to Mike Conley, Kyle Lowry. These are your guys. And maybe the restricted free agent market yields a possibility. Although again, not that anybody should have wanted him. Kyle Kuzma just signed an extension, so this is what it is, right? This is what it is. So I don't think this is anything that anybody should be like, oh crap, there go the team's plans. Cause I don't think they were ever really, if they're smart, counting on this or banking on something big. I always thought it was more using their cap space to facilitate a trade, but I want to get your thoughts because I know you put more thought into this than just about anyone.
Yeah, again, plans that we talked about in the past, they were always in the hypothetical and always on the side of the pessimism, except for maybe Anthony Davis, which was like, well, if he wants to get that 10-year max, 35% contract, turns out he'd rather not gamble on his health and secure the bag. Totally makes sense.
Good for him.
Exactly. Good for him. It's tough. I think the bigger factor here is that the 2013 and 2014 draft classes were on the whole so bad that this is around the time we're going to start feeling the burn. Yep. Because look at what past free agencies have been. And, they've been fine. This year was pretty weak. The year before was the big one. We saw 45% of the NBA switch teams, and they were going to sign to multiple contracts. So, of course, 2020 was going to be weak as a result. And then teams are keeping their players for 2021. So the market is shrinking before we even get there. So one of the things that I kind of laid out was I just looked at a top 100 list, and I found CBS. They had a good list. I didn't agree with every single thing that they had on there in terms of ranking, but I took the top 30. And this is the top 30 for this season. Keep in mind, it's not going to be the top 30 4 or 5 years from now. So if things look different, that's probably why. But the thing is that based on how contracts are lapping or going to end up, it's not going to be the best situation for the Knicks for 2, maybe 3 years. So let's quickly get into it, John. So, we were talking about 2021. You've got Kawhi. He's not going to leave. I don't see why he would.
Just doesn't feel like it's in the air.
No. So if he's not going anywhere, then you've got Kyle Lowry. I took the top 30 of this list, by the way, and I found every projected free agency year and the age that they'd be during that projected free agency year.
Yes. Lowry, I believe, is 35.
He's going to be 35. Right.
There you go.
And now if you're Toronto, your chances of Giannis are gone. So what are you really saving up all your money for? If you want to bring back Kyle Lowry, you can afford to do that.
Yeah.
Then, there's some of the players you mentioned, but none of them crack the top 30 this year. None of them is really going to be that guy who can actually start to change the trajectory of your franchise.
Yes.
And that's because that's ultimately what we want, right? We're looking for stars and superstars, guys who are in that more upper echelon of players.
Yep.
So from the Knicks perspective, they're likely going to get a top 10 pick this year. That's fine. Have tons of cap space, but no.
Can you imagine if they
stars.
didn't get a top 10 pick? That would mean that they would not have finished with one of the 5 worst records, and they would have gotten as unlucky as is possible to get.
Or they surpassed expectations and did well, right? But
that's what I'm saying. It means they did not finish with one of the 5 worst records. Which
I thought you meant in terms of I can't believe they didn't finish poorly enough to fall far enough where they still fell into the top 10.
I think we could all agree that if the Knicks don't finish with one of the 5 worst records in the league this season, that would be something of a miracle.
Probably.
Anyway, continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So top 10 pick. I think that's safe to say. Sure. Tons of cap space, but no stars to really spend it on. Yep. You've got the Mitchell Robinson contract coming up. If for some reason Mitchell Robinson is not on this team, what are you replacing him with? How are you going about that? And then you should ultimately bolster your backcourt. They're the stars. I shouldn't say stars. The players who are out there in free agency this upcoming 2021, they're mostly backcourt players, which is great because the Knicks could use some help in the backcourt. So that lines up really nicely. Then you've got 2022, right? You've got Steph Curry, who seems he wants to sign an extension. He's made that pretty clear recently.
He is. I think he's going to be the last one. The last one. He like Dirk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whole career. I think Steph might be the very last. I mean, well, Dame. Sorry, I forgot about Dame. Because Dame's going to retire after Steph. And although you never know. Either way, those are your last. Those are your last 2 who are going to stay with their team the whole time. I don't think we're ever going to see that again. Right. Just for what it's worth.
Exactly. He's 34 anyway. Then you've got James Harden, who made it abundantly clear he doesn't want to be in New York, and the Knicks would have to give up enough pieces. And how are you matching a star around him? Because you've just traded so much for James Harden.
And do you want to do you want to give a max contract to 33-year-old James Harden?
No.
We don't need to talk about this now, but it's just the fact that he asked the question.
And again, all of this is subject to change. It's very touch and go. There's plenty going on here, but these players aren't not going to be the ages that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Then you've got Jimmy Butler, who's going to be about the same age as James Harden would be. He could opt out in favor of a bigger max contract. Also, maybe he has James Harden on his team as a teammate. Then
you never know.
They can hit the open market at the same time. After that, you've got Bradley Beal. Beal's a great candidate. It seems like Beal is constantly in trade rumors. The idea of, okay, well, you could bring him in. That certainly works. But Washington, I don't know if they'll keep him long term. He seems to want to stay there, even though fans and media try to kind of force him out. But he'll be on the younger side. He'll be only 20.
He will. But can I just interject very briefly? It seems pretty clear to me at this point, when we look at an NBA free agency, that the biggest stars don't hit the market unless their teams are contending. And here's what I mean by that. Because if you have a Bradley Beal, right? Or for that matter, a James Harden, the Wizards are going to know if Bradley Beal is going to sign an extension there probably within the next 3 months.
Possibly.
Or it's possible. At the very least, they're going to know by this summer. So it's like the notion that he's ever going to even hit the open market. Like if at some point the Bradley Beal sweepstakes happen, they're going to happen. And I guess, sure, there's always the possibility that we get another Kawhi trade, even though Bradley Beal's not of that ilk. where you have a team saying, you know what, fuck it, we're going to just try to win the championship this year. And if the guy leaves, he leaves. And that's fine. Most teams don't operate like that. And the only guys you've gotten that have actually hit the open market are your Durant's, your Kawhi's, your Kyrie Irving's, where those teams thought they could win a championship in those years. So they didn't have to ask themselves the question of, oh, should we entertain trading this guy? Because they were trying to win. So I just want to put that out there, because I think as we continue, whether it's 2021, 22, 23, that backdrop has to apply. It's not, there's no more of we're just going to assume that these guys are going to be on the market, because we should not. Recent history says otherwise. They're going to get the bag. And then when they want to leave, they're just going to be like, all right, I'm ready to go now. Send me where, and they could do that. The only question is, when is the first guy to do it with 4 years left on their deal instead of 2? So, but I digress. Sorry. It's
true though. I mean, look, Jrue Holiday just got traded from the Pelicans to the Bucks. He could hit the open market hypothetically, but you think he's going to leave the best player in the NBA? That situation, right? If you trade Bradley Beal to a team that's really good, why is he going to say, okay, I'm going to leave this team now, even though they traded for me, and go elsewhere? He's probably just going to re-sign when that season ends, because he'll be comfortable. That's why you bring these guys in too. You try to say well, we're bringing you in because we prioritize you, and this is what we want to do to build around you as part of the package and win. So it doesn't make sense to, because again, either he's with the Wizards with the intention of re-signing, or he just goes somewhere else, and chances are it's a much better team, and he re-signs there. So that's why I've never felt like he is a good possibility for the Knicks. It's just crazier things can happen, but it just doesn't seem like to be a realistic possibility. Yeah. And then in terms of 2022 as well, you've got Chris Paul, who's 37 years old. Who knows what's going to happen there? It's safe to say, move on. No. Right. And so then if you're the Knicks, you're hopefully taken that next step where you're in play-in territory for the tournament. You have plenty of payroll, cap space that is at your disposal, which is great. You have to pay Kevin Knox. You've got some B-list, B-tier free agents like Zach LaVine, Marcus Smart. But
in 2022,
yes, but it's a really weak year for the most part, outside of the guys I just listed.
LaVine is a guy I could see hitting the market, by the way.
Me too. Yes, especially because the Bulls, depending on where they're at in terms of their rebuild, you just never know. We know the Knicks supposedly had interest before. Obviously, there's the Tibbs factor. Crazier things have happened. We also don't know what type of talent the Knicks will have at that point, whereas they could draft someone in 2021 and it could be a point guard. Or it could be some sort of wing who's actually would be starting maybe on another team, but because of the fact that there's better talent in front of him, he's coming off the bench in a different role.
And if Zach LaVine is your savior, maybe ask yourself some different questions.
Right. And I think the other thing too with a player like LaVine, and this is kind of what my thinking has been, because of what free agency looks like over the next already 2 years, where it's pretty depressing, you could still sign that type of player to a longer term contract and use him as an important piece, and also at the same time as salary filler for a bigger trade.
Yes.
Sort of like what we just saw with the Chris Paul trade,
Yes.
Ricky Rubio is not this player that you would salivate over, and yet he was just flipped immediately after back to the Timberwolves. He had value. He wasn't the most important piece, but that was enough to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. And yes. And LaVine is obviously a better shot creator and the whole thing, but
of course, but it's turning your your cap space into value, which then can be further turned into something of more value. That's the goal. That's the idea of why you would sign someone like Zach LaVine in this case.
Yeah. And so hopefully what this little exercise has made very clear is, if anybody thinks the Knicks are just going to sit around and wait for the next opportunity where they could pitch someone in a meeting, I got another thing coming to you. But again, if you've been listening to us, you've been reading what I've written of late. If Jeremy, I think, feels the same way. I don't think that was ever the plan. And I think that's why you hear Tibbs outwardly say things in press conferences like, we have to be aggressive in all areas. And I know that scares some folks, but what else do you want him to do here? Because it's yes, the 21 draft will be obviously the most important moment that the franchise has had since I guess when they took Porzingis, right? Arguably, like, and I don't know if you want to say the lottery will be the more important moment. I would actually argue with the depth that it's shaping up to be, the actual draft night will be the most important because they will have a chance to take a transcendent player, if like in almost all likelihood. So that's a huge part of it. And I think they are gearing up towards that. But I also think that they are going to continue to be aggressive on the trade market if and when opportunities present themselves for this exact reason, for this exact discussion that we just had. And it's a matter of what can you get to try to make it so that whether it's LaVine in 2 years, he projects to be your third best guy, right? Because you will have drafted a star in next year, and you will have potentially traded for another star-ish player over, at some point between now and then, right? That's the goal. It's not like there's nobody in MSG, I don't think, is sitting around being like, all right, well, I guess let's queue up the next time we could show our what do they show LeBron James? Sopranos presentation? Yeah. I hope they should go dig that one out again.
Yeah.
I don't know what else needs to be said.
Well, I think the fact is that with all of these teams, it's incredibly rare to find a contender where their three best players are all homegrown. Like it's happened before, of course. Oklahoma City.
That's the obvious one.
Chicago Bulls when Derrick Rose, Luol Deng, Joakim Noah. Like it can happen. It's just on the rarer side. You're going to find even the Warriors. They had Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, yes, but they also had the benefit of Andre Iguodala off the bench. And he was their finals MVP that first season that they won. So it's the sort of thing where it's nice to have this homegrown idea, but eventually these players are still assets and you try to pool them together and flip them from quantity to quality. And the one benefit that the Knicks really have over the next few years, because they have no choice but to draft and develop their talent and here and then trade and maybe make some upgrades in free agency on the smaller end. But the benefit there is as they're doing that, they have all these rookie contracts and rookie scales, while the bigger contracts of some of the stars that are actually maybe potentially available in like 2023, 2024, the cost of getting those assets, it goes down, which benefits the Knicks. Because if we're talking about, all right, well, the Knicks aren't really going to try to strike on a star until maybe like 2023 in terms of trading for someone. You look at the players who are maybe expiring.
Wait, in terms of trading or signing?
Well, trading, because signing is, again, based on how it's going to all line up, because in terms of 2023, that's
Embiid and Jokic, and I think that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
So you could try to expedite something where you say, we've got RJ Barrett and his cap hold, which would be around $32 million, $33 million. The max contract should actually be less than that. So you'd probably extend RJ the year before or before.
I was about to say they could extend RJ if this season. Well, no, not this season. They could extend RJ the following year. Yeah.
Yeah. That sort of thing where, you've got some money on the books. Who knows what the situation is elsewhere, where if you really wanted to do something in 2023, like if you thought Embiid was possible, obviously a Leon Rose client, and the Suns are in disrepair and you sense that Devin Booker is going to bolt after 1 year, you say, all right, well, let's trade LaVine and some other assets that we have. Also keep in mind that the Knicks have a ton of 2023 draft picks. I don't think it's a mistake, or I don't think the only reason that they have been collecting 2023 picks is because of the idea of a double draft. I think that they are fully aware that Devin Booker and Karl Anthony Towns are free agents that year.
They're getting their bullets ready.
Right. And that's the perfect time. That's also another reason why you sign players to longer deals, like in 2022. If you had a LaVine, signed him to 3 years, you can flip him on draft night. You don't have to worry about well, we have to clear the space for him and all these other things. It's smooth. It's an easy transition to do that type of plan.
The one disagreement I have with you is I think, and I'm sure I've said this before, I think they're going to make a trade in the next, I think by opening night next year, I said this on the crossover pod we do with Locked On. I think by opening night next year, they will have traded for, I don't know who, but I think they will have traded for a guy.
But see, unless it's someone like Levine, I don't know who that really is going to be.
I think the NBA
about the stars, it's just like who really is there that's going to be available.
The NBA is a funny place, and things could be hunky dory one week, and then the next week it's like, oh, so and so requested a trade, really? Like, look, I know we're a dysfunctional franchise, but think about where things were with Porzingis the week, or forget the week, the day before that trade.
Right. You never know what could actually be going on. Sure. But as you've also said in the past, where you're at this point where it's like the last 2 years of a player's contract is really when you start to see movement. Before then, when it's like 3-4 years left on the deal, there's not really a chance in hell. But so based on how these contracts are lining up, where you've got that we're a year away or 2 years away from that free agent hitting the market, there aren't that many options out there.
Yes.
That are like stars who are also worth being traded for.
Unless, look, I don't disagree with you. Your premise is sound and history bears it out. But I think that gets back to the Knicks needing to continue to up the asset portfolio of what's in house right now, which is what gets us back to what this conversation started with, which is like, oh, Mitchell Robinson looks good, Kevin Knox looks good, Emmanuel Quickie looks good, RJ Barrett looks good, Obi Toppin, hopefully a week or two from now we'll be saying the same thing about him. Like, if you think these 5 guys are going to be here on the Knicks in 4 or 5 years, it's like the starting 5. I got news for you. It's just, that's not how it works. It's just go look at literally any other situation in the NBA. So yeah, I don't know. Look, we're not going to sit here and go through like, oh, who might it be? But I do think the NBA is the Wild West, and something will emerge.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical in terms of, because of how big that pool is. I don't disagree that they're going to make upgrades between now and a year from now, or I guess 10 months from now, if they restart the season back in October.
Yeah.
They're going to make some sort of change. It's not going to be just the draft and just free agency. And quite frankly, I hope it's not, because you've got a lot of potential free agents coming off the books. You want to get value for them. And if you can turn that value, packaging it into something that's more than just draft equity and getting some talent that can help you now and start to take that next step, that's really important. And because the Knicks have so much talent around them, and by that I mean like expendable talent, in that you can trade these guys. Like you and I, we love Frank Ntilikina, but we're also realistic about what his role might be here long term. Oh. If another team feels that he is a long-term piece for them, maybe off the bench as like a 7th, 8th man or a defensive specialist off the bench, they might actually say, well, we'll give you something that's of worth for him. And for the Knicks, they might feel, okay, well, we weren't necessarily going to bring him back, but we like the value that's coming back instead of betting on him. Or I don't see a team necessarily biting on Dennis Smith Jr., but if they did, if you don't see yourself re-signing him, flipping him. Nerlens Noel could be a similar story. Alec Burks, Reggie Bullock, Austin Rivers. There are a lot of these easy to move salaries, especially when you consider if the Knicks use their cap space, the $18 million or so that they have, and rent it out for a year, they're going to get some value back there too. So there are enough avenues for them to basically have their cake and eat it too, where they do collect draft equity, but also get assets that they can then turn into winning now as well. And that's exciting. That's a great position to be in.
I'll be curious to see how they're not going to let this cap space go to waste. They're not going to, we know that's not going to happen. I'll be curious to see how they use it.